Good morning, everyone. Sorry, we were waiting a few more minutes to have some additional people. We know they're coming. Thank you for those who have already come in this cold morning. We do appreciate it, and it's Thursday, the second to last day of the commission, so we know everyone is quite tired from the long day, so thank you. I think we will start, and then as people come in, we can continue because we have till 9:30. We may be able to spill over for a few more minutes, but the session starts at 10. So I will make the first presentation, but before that, I would just like to welcome also the other panelists. On my left, I have Vlad Truska, who is the team leader for Mitigation Data and Analysis Program from UNFCCC, who will talk about the Paris Agreement and outcomes of COP24 in Katowice in December. On my right is Dr. Albina Chua, Director General of the National Bureau of Statistics of Tanzania, who will talk about their experience in climate change statistics. Last year we had Jamaica, who presented on their report on climate change statistics. It's the first developing country that I know who's produced a report on climate change statistics from a national statistical office, and I think Dr. Albina Chua and her office is planning to do one as well. So we're very pleased to see these developments. And there must be other countries, I just don't know them. And on Dr. Albina Chua's right is Ms. Brigitte Brill, longtime friend and colleague, maybe 20 years we know each other. She's a senior sustainable economics affairs officer from the Division for Sustainable Development Goals to share their work and plans towards implementing the 2030 agenda in the area of climate change. So I will start with my presentation on climate change statistics at the global level. And just to recap very briefly that in 2009, at the Statistical Commission, there was a program review carried out by the Australian Bureau of Statistics. But at that time, due to the political nature of the subject, there was no follow-up to this program review. And after that, UNSD at least didn't do anything for some years, but we are very pleased that ECE picked up on this topic and established a task force in which we do participate, and they've developed recommendations and a list of ECE indicators on climate change, which I'll bring up later. So this is the IPCC framework for those who may not be familiar. This is from the fourth assessment report, and our work here at UNSD is based on that. And this is the framework for the development of environment statistics. Some of you may know this publication. And we have in Chapter 5 a cross-cutting application of the FDS that links climate change and environment statistics based on the IPCC framework. And in the diagram here on the right, I know you can't read it, but this is in the document, and it looks at the climate process drivers, the climate change evidence, climate change impacts and vulnerability, and mitigation and adaptation. And we have different subcomponents, statistical topics, and statistics underlying each of these areas. And again, this is the IPCC sequence of climate change. We look at the drivers, the evidence, impacts and vulnerability, and then mitigation adaptation. And it just gives some examples of the types of information that would be included in each of these areas. And just to give an idea here in terms of the availability of statistics, traditionally climate process drivers and evidence, there is more data available, but we are aware that in many countries, developing countries, there still may be a challenge. With regard to impacts and vulnerability, there are some data, but again, impacts, I think, is becoming really more important, and more information is necessary. And vulnerability, there is a strong need there to develop methodologies and capacity. With mitigation adaptation, this is probably the most challenging area still, and There's a lot of work going on adaptation statistics. Part of the ECE task force looks at that as well. There's a new subgroup which we are also part of, focusing primarily on adaptation statistics because of its difficulty and importance. Again, a very brief recap that we at UNSD decided to come back to the Statistical Commission from 2009 back in 2016. And we did a joint report with UNECE, a report of the Secretary General of Climate Change Statistics that was discussed at the 47th session of the Statistical Commission. Further information is available on the links, and the main decisions, at least for us, were that the Commission asked that countries use the FDS, the Framework for the Development of Environment Statistics, to guide the development of climate change statistics and indicators because of the close relationship between climate change statistics and environment statistics, and also asked UNSD to review and consider the UNECE set of climate change related statistics and indicators as a basis for developing a global set. And this is just briefly the sort of timeline that we are sharing here. So the ECE set of indicators was endorsed by the Conference of European Statisticians in June 2017 as an initial list. And what we have been doing, we've been pilot testing the ECE list with developing countries, and also discussing the set in different fora, for example, in our expert group on environment statistics, but also in regional and national capacity building work that we conduct. Very briefly, a summary of the results we got from testing the ECE list of indicators. This list is divided into 5 areas: the drivers, emissions, impacts, mitigation, and adaptation. And we tested it with 12 countries, and we analyzed only 13 out of the 39 questions, looking at whether the indicator is available in the country. If not, what are the main problems, and whether this indicator was compiled by the NSO. There were many other questions, but we didn't do a full analysis. We already got, I think, a good enough picture, and we will be taking to global consultation, which I'll come to in a while. So basically, the observations from the pilot survey and from discussions in the expert group were about the indicators were that there's still a lot of methodological issues, the lack of technical capacity, difficulty in terms of human and financial resources. There was no policy framework underlying this, which is why we've now started working with UNFCCC. And then several indicators were not relevant or applicable to the developing countries, and there was a need to adjust some of the indicators, include new sub-areas such as oceans, or indicators that may be particularly relevant for developing countries. So the main points, the key points were the pilot survey demonstrated the need to develop new or additional indicators, to develop a process on how to identify and modify the indicators based on existing global processes. For example, the work being carried out by UNFCCC, also the Sendai framework, of course, and also to develop a systematic process for full consultation at national level to involve all stakeholders, to bring everybody on board at the same time. So in the 2018, we again prepared a report of the Secretary General. That was last year, and this time we involved UNECE as before, and then for the first time we invited UNFCCC to also co-author this report of the Secretary General. And again, the main decisions that I'm mentioning here were that countries were requested to participate in the pilot survey as well as in the planned global consultation to ensure that their voices are included in the development of this global set, and to enhance collaboration between national statistical offices and national authorities which are responsible for reporting on this subject. And also for UNSD and UNFCCC to strengthen the link between statistics and policy, for example, undertaking joint activities in capacity building or in the development of the global set. So what we are currently doing, I mean, we presented this report last year. We are reviewing the UNEC list and the IPCC and FDS frameworks and identify links to the Paris Agreement. We're reviewing the UNEC list of indicators and looking at other lists. I'll come to those results shortly. And we're also developing a work plan based on the list of plan activities that we had included in last year's Commission report, and we will come back to the Commission probably, I think, in 2021 to report on the work, being done. We're planning for the global consultation probably now, I would say, in 2020, given that we have a lot of developments which you'll hear from Vlad and Brigitte about other processes that are going on also this year. So in order to strengthen the link between statistics and policy, we have been engaging much closer with UNFCCC. We have joint reports, side events. UNFCCC participates in our expert group. We've also, UNSD was invited by UNFCCC to a workshop on adaptation indicators in Tokyo last year. And also UNFCCC is participating in some of our regional workshops, for example, the one we had in Lebanon last November with UNEP and ESQA, a joint workshop. Then at our expert group meeting on environment statistics, we discussed climate change quite intensely. We had a lot of, we had working groups to discuss specific points, and some of the main outcomes were that the expert group agreed to use the areas of the IPCC framework to structure the global set of statistics and indicators to provide a direct link between policy and reporting. The expert group also agreed the indicators should be based on the IPCC framework and linked through the Paris Agreement to strengthen the link between statistics and policy, and that a limited core set of indicators should be developed with additional indicators in a tiering system so that we can cater to countries with different priorities or capabilities. And we haven't decided exactly the number, but that's work in progress. Sorry. Last year, we at our expert group, we also discussed the role of national statistical offices, and as far as we know, we had Finland presenting at the expert group. It's the only national statistical office responsible for reporting on GHG emissions. Mexico is quite involved. They have an entry point in the climate change reporting through the National Committee. We are also encouraging the formation of national committees on climate change, or expanding the committees on environment statistics to also include climate change statistics, which are very related. And with regard to the global consultation, it was agreed it should take place either in 2019 to 2020, and results should be ready prior to the global stocktake of the Paris Agreement, the first one expected in 2023. So what we have been doing on the global set, there are just a few more slides. We have been consulting international regional sources and primarily national sources. We have covered about 103 countries to date. We're looking at UNFCCC national communication, national adaptation plans, national statistical offices websites, official reports. All this is all official information, either provided to UNFCCC or produced in countries on their own websites or reports. These are the 103 countries that we have looked at so far. Sometimes there's more than one source in a country. For example, it could be a report to UNFCCC. It could also be a publication on the National Statistical Office website, etc. But we are still discussing how many more countries we should cover. We feel it's fairly representative, but we may have to do a bit more. So we have covered about, I think, over 6,000 indicators that we've been looking at across these different areas. Indicators, as I said, come from a variety of sources in the country. And what we have done is we're identifying a list of the most commonly repeated indicators according to the 5 areas of the IPCC framework. And thereby we're promoting a bottom-up approach to the selection of indicators. And we feel that this is truly representative of what countries are doing or plan to be doing. And in the next few slides, you'll see the presentation of the common indicators that we have currently been able to compile in terms of the numbers. So, for example, this is in driver indicators. These are the top, I don't know if it's about 10 to 15 indicators that are being repeatedly reported by countries. So the first column is the countries which have reported out of the 103, and the second is the number of occurrences. When we say multiple sources per country, that means it could be repeated more than once. What we are also looking at is comparing this to the UN ECE list of indicators, so we are aware that some of them are very similar, and also to the SDG indicators. For the moment, we still have more work to do. These terms that are here are not the final indicators. Obviously, some of the challenges is that I'm looking at impacts now, that sometimes the name of the indicator is slightly different in one country to the next. So we are still refining the final wording, and we'll try to make it as close to the ECE list as possible, and to the SDG indicators as well. And also, for example, in this case, we have for the moment separated occurrence of drought and flood and occurrence of hurricanes, etc. But these, of course, can be grouped in one indicator, calling it occurrence of hazardous events and disasters, for example, and then you can have subcategories, so to reduce the number of overall indicators. And then this is vulnerability, and I'm not spending time on this. The presentation will be available, of course. These are the mitigation indicators. And also the other problem we are facing is sometimes it's difficult to allocate indicators to a single area. For example, forest area change could be mitigation, could be vulnerability. So we're discussing whether we should repeat them or cross-reference them to make sure that they fit in the areas that they are important in. And finally, this is the adaptation set so far. And of course, there are more. Like in this slide, we're showing the last one is use of hydro energy. It says 7 countries. There are several others below, but these are the ones we could currently fit on the slide. And my intern is sitting at the back of the room, Ebin. He's been helping me with this, and we are looking at some of the indicators that couldn't yet fit into these categories, and we're still going to be further refining and adding to the list. And the final slide, just about our further work. We're going to continue this compilation. We're going to review and compile metadata, looking at, of course, the work of UNECE, so not to duplicate efforts for the common indicators, and start developing some type of tiering system before the global consultation. As I said, hopefully early next year we can launch this. And we continue to engage with UNFCCC and other partners, and ensure the linkage of the work on the global set to the adaptation program of UNFCCC Article 7. I know Vlad will speak about this, so I shouldn't say any more on this, but definitely to all the relevant areas of UNFCCC work. Thank you very much. I'll now, I think, pass it on to Vlad Truska. Thank you, Marcus. And he will speak about work from UNFCCC. Thank you.
Hi, good morning, everybody. I hope it works. I'm really grateful that I'm here to speak with you, and I want to thank UNSD for inviting me. As you have seen from Rina's presentation, we have a great deal of cooperation between UNSD and UNFCCC lately, and we have increased a lot. And there are also a lot of links between the statistical world and the reporting for climate change purposes. So you will see this in my presentation in detail. First of all, who we are, because again, I'm coming here from the UNFCCC Secretariat, the so-called UN Climate Secretariat. So basically, we are in charge of the 3 major agreements, multilateral agreements: the Climate Convention from 1992, then the Kyoto Protocol that came up to provide targets to developed countries to reduce their emissions, and which was followed by the Doha Amendment. And lately, of course, it's on everybody's lips, the Paris Agreement. So we were mandated to take care of all these agreements. In addition, it was, I think, very important during our last conference of the parties, and I will explain a bit more about this in the coming slides. What we have heard from the UN Secretary General, and his first intervention was that we are in deep trouble, that climate change is running faster than we are. So the importance of tackling the subject now came out more and more in the last 10-15 years. This is why we had the Paris Agreement 3 years ago, agreed by all parties, around 200 countries in the world. Then again, we are involved in a lot of things. A lot of people ask me from time to time, what do we do? We have negotiations every year, about 2 weeks in technical negotiations in mid-year in Bonn, and then again 2 weeks of negotiations in November or December in one of the regions. And people tend to ask me, what are you going to do there? What is it taking so long? And this is because climate change is related with everything from energy, agriculture, forest, and so on. And this is why also we are also involved in activities coming from intergovernmental negotiations. We have a lot of constituted bodies that we are supporting, but also providing technical expertise and, of course, analysis of information and data. I won't touch a lot on the information that we receive from parties. Last year at the same place, same time a year ago, I have explained in more detail what is the reporting that we have. We are handling with the Climate Secretariat, so it will be easy to go back to the website and check there. So this time I didn't want to touch more on the reporting and review process, but it is important to highlight that the inventories of greenhouse gas emissions that we receive from especially from developed parties, but lately also from the developing parties, they use official statistical data. So they are based on the statistical data coming from the national statistical offices. So there is a big deal of the cooperation that should come at the national level between the statistical offices and the authorities that are responsible for reporting climate change information. We have this national communications, again, coming from developed countries and developing countries, and lately national determined contributions under the Paris Agreement, which set the plan for the coming years in terms of the climate action that the parties have set to themselves. It's part of the presentation on the title of this side event, and a lot of people again that are not involved in the climate negotiation process might ask, what is this COP24? What is this the acronym, first of all, and then why is it? What is it going on there? So basically, this is the conference of the parties, which is our supreme body. It's the meeting of all the representative of the parties to the convention, and especially now the Paris Agreement. And this is our 24th session, was in Katowice at the end of last year. And this is where an important milestone was set to adopt the Paris Agreement work program, which basically sets the rules to guide parties, organizations, the Secretariat in implementing the Paris Agreement. So whatever happened in 2015, it was an important milestone with the adoption of the Paris Agreement, but Paris Agreement without a clear set of guidelines could have not been implemented. So this is what happened actually in Katowice in December. Parties sit together after 3 years of negotiations and managed to adopt this work program. The work program, as it was again in the news in December, you might have seen this. Again, sets the rule book for the Paris Agreement. It explains how the Paris Agreement will be implemented by parties, by other stakeholders, by the Secretariat, and it was agreed. It's like a set of decisions of about 200 pages, explaining in detail different activities from mitigation, adaptation, finance, means of implementation, and especially transparency. I will focus more on in the next slides on the transparency. Again, in the Paris Agreement in work program, it is very clear stipulated the way the institutions will work efficiently, and again the balance between different topics. But also a difference compared to the past is the differentiation between parties. And the flexibility that was given to the parties, especially developing parties that need that. But moving from a binary process to a full process of that capture all the parties in the world, all the countries. And in addition to that, what happened in Katowice and the adoption of the Paris Agreement work program sets a clear path for the implementation of the Paris Agreement, but also for parties to increase their ambition in terms of the climate action. Now preparing the presentation, I was thinking that again there are a lot of things that are going on, and there are a lot of topics, and I won't focus on all. I just choose transparency and adaptation because I think these are the ones that are mostly related with the work of the national statistical offices, and this is where the interactions are very visible. So the transparency framework, it's basically the modalities, procedures, and guidelines to make sure that parties are reporting information on their action and support that is provided or received. So, as mentioned earlier, there is this transition that will happen in the next 5-6 years until 2024, between the current system, which was the monitoring, reporting, verification system under the Convention and the Kyoto Protocol, which was a binary system that covered different activities and different tasks for developed countries and developing countries, to a new system, which is the Enhanced Transparency Framework, that covers the same kind of tasks and activities for all countries in the world. Of course, this comes with a caveat, because some of the developing countries, and especially small island developing states and the least developed countries, they have a bit of flexibility in the timing of the reporting and the information that they will report. But in principle, this is what Paris Agreement brings. It brings a unified system in which all the parties have the same obligations to report to the climate action information. So this will come the first time we will start receiving information under the Paris Agreement based on the new rules will be in 2024. And then every 2 years we will receive these biennial transparency reports from all the parties. And this will cover also the national inventory report of the GHG emissions. And this is exactly what I was mentioning before. This is exactly where there's a very important, significant link between the statistical offices and the authorities that will need to report on the inventories. We are using the IPCC methodology. I know that this was something that there were some discussions around this subject about the methodology that is used. This is going on for more than 20 years now. We have the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change that provides the methodology of how to calculate and estimate emissions based on the statistical data, and the parties decided to continue with that and to upgrade this IPCC methodology in 2019, which is going to happen. It's a very complex process. But again, we will receive information on the tracking progress in implementing the NDCs of the parties, and especially on adaptation and the financial and transfer of technology and capacity development. So this is one of the important parts of the transparency framework. It's the support that is provided by developed countries, and also the support that is received by and needed by the developing countries. This will need to be reported very clear now in this transparency reports, biennial transparency reports. In addition, the transparency report has two more important tracks. The technical expert review, so the information that we receive will be reviewed, and also this will be considered at the multilateral level, where the reporting review process will culminate with this discussion that already happens under the convention currently, with this multilateral consideration of the progress. Similarly, with the Paris Agreement, we have seen a very clear goal on adaptation, and I'm not sure that, or maybe it is clear in the slide, but there is an important part of the climate discussion that links to the adaptation. So it's not only about mitigation and reducing emissions, but it's also very important to start looking on adaptation and resilience. And this is what Paris brings. It brings a very clear global goal on adaptation and adaptive action to enhance the adaptive capacity, to strengthen resilience, and also to reduce the vulnerability on climate change. And this is linked, of course, with the temperature goal of increase in global average temperature, not more than 2 degrees Celsius. So this is a part that was, again, very focused on the Paris Agreement, and it is linked now with the Paris Agreement work program that sets very clear activities also for adaptation. Only to put it in the context, I thought that the two graphs on the right, especially the link between the adaptation process and the activities that are happening under the UN FCCC, but also with the Sustainable Development Goals and the disaster risk reduction, I think there is a place there where these things should be considered together and discussed, to have more cooperation in between the three areas, because in the end it is about reducing vulnerability and enhancing resilience. So this I won't touch much on this, because I think that maybe Brigitte will speak a bit on this, and also to highlight the Sustainable Development Goals 13 that we are working on, and where the Climate Secretariat is the primary international intergovernmental forum for negotiating this global response to climate change. I will conclude now, because we don't have much time, and I think it's important to highlight some of the things that are happening in the coming future, and also a bit on the conclusions and what we have seen lately. So the countries now will have to submit a large amount of data, and this will start happening. As I said, the first biennial transparency report will come in 2024, but there will be a lot of preparations for this to happen. There is currently a gap between developed parties that are doing, for example, national inventory reports every year since the last 15 years, and developing countries that maybe some of them have done once or twice a report with the full inventory submission, and maybe some of the developing countries, they have never done a full report of their emissions. So there is this gap that needs to be filled, and there will be a lot of capacity building activities in the next 5-6 years to make sure that nobody is left behind, and then everybody is able to report accurately to the information that is requested. Definitely, the data will come from the national statistical offices, and this is what I'm saying in this forum over and over again, because we are using, parties are using national statistical information, official data, to be able to calculate their emissions. It is about calculation, it is about estimating emissions, and less about going and measuring the emissions at the chimney or at the a farm. So this is why there is an important aspect that needs to be tackled for parties to understand the link between statistics and climate change data, and to ensure that there is a bit more cooperation at the national level between statistical offices and the authorities that are involved in the climate change information. And I'm saying this over and over again because I think there will be a moment when this will come even more prominent at the domestic level. There is again an expected increase because of the Paris Agreement, and especially the Paris Agreement work program, and I know that this will come again more and more in the coming years. Thank you.
Thank you, Vlad, for a really excellent overview of what has been happening, what took place at COP24, and what is expected. I think we all have a big challenge ahead of us, but very exciting challenge as well. So I will now pass on. Yeah, pass the next presentation will be by Brigitte Breld from the Division for Sustainable Development Goals. Brigitte, please.
Thank you, and thank you, Rina, for the invitation to join you this morning. I know it's brutal to start at 8:15, but nonetheless, thank you everyone for showing up. And I think this is actually a nice bridge from Vlad's presentation on the climate-specific aspects and the UNFCCC's work. So what I will speak to is the even more, in a sense, aggregated level of climate change and how it is dealt with in the context of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. An agenda that was adopted just a few months prior to the Paris Agreement, in fact, in 2015. And for that reason, of course, they're often thought together, and they are very intrinsically linked, though completely distinct political processes, as Vlad also emphasized. So let me see if this thing works. Yeah. So just to give a brief description, I come from the Secretariat of the High-Level Political Forum for Sustainable Development. The forum is a global forum that is held here in New York at the UN. It is held every year under the auspices of what is known as the Economic and Social Council. And then every 4 years, it's directly under the General Assembly at the summit level. And in fact, this year, 2019, we will have the first HLPF review of the implementation of the Sustainable Development Goals at the summit level in September. But I'll get back to that briefly. So the purpose, again, of the forum is to enhance integration, provide political leadership, and address new and emerging issues, besides, of course, reviewing the progress on the SDGs. In the context of the forum, climate change, as Vlad also showed, is a specific goal in the set of 17 SDGs. And because of this link with the Paris Agreement, of course, and with the negotiations, the goal essentially refers to the Paris Agreement and the implementation of that. So they are, in fact, very closely linked. But of course, climate is integral to all the other SDGs as well, and hence that's one of the ideas with the high-level political forum is, in fact, to view all these separate topics in an integrated and balanced manner. So the role, just to say, of the Statistical Commission in the context of this global forum is, in fact, that they have been tasked with providing technical support for the development of indicators and the monitoring framework for the 17 goals that have 169 targets under them. This is an ongoing task that is very complicated, and so probably not for statisticians, but for people like me that are more generalists, but basically divides the indicators in different tiers depending on their current maturity and how much they're used, and already have methodologies that are adopted and accepted by countries, to the ones that are basically desirable, where there is no current methodology agreed on how to develop and define the indicators. Did I skip something? Yes. Just a few numbers from the last high-level political forum, which takes place in July every year, to give you an idea of the scale. It's an 8-day session with 3 high-level ministerial days. The main sort of anchor of the forum is really around the voluntary national reviews. It's a very specific and interesting process because, unlike the processes under the UNFCCCs, we don't have mandatory reporting on progress from countries, right? So we have countries that volunteer to present their progress and what they're doing to promote and implement the SDGs at the national level. There were 46 at the last high-level political forum. There will be 51 in the coming session in July. And we are more than, I think, 160 countries after that will actually have reported a few more than once to the high-level political forum, which we consider a significant indicator of commitment to the 2030 agenda and to share the experiences and the challenges that are found at the national level. The other interesting part we find, which is very old in a sense in the context of the sustainable development negotiations, is the very close involvement of major groups and other stakeholders that have very good access to the negotiations and that participate. And in fact, at the last HLPF, we had 125 major groups and other stakeholders making interventions during these 8 days of meetings. So, okay, I already jumped to this, that 20, or that 51 will present this year. The last few years, in order to basically make the process manageable in terms of review of the SDGs, the GA, the member states, decided to group the goals rather, into sets of 5, where the 17th goal, which is the one that relates to what we call means of implementation, basically, will be reviewed every year. This summer, in July, SDG 13 on climate action is going to be reviewed. So it is the first opportunity in the context of the Sustainable Development Agenda to actually address progress on climate action, and of course referring to the Paris Agreement. So this is something that we're quite excited about. In terms of the SDG 13 goal, there are sets of course, of targets underlying them, and they relate primarily to the sort of the aggregated information in terms of development of NDCs and that sort of thing. They do not go into the specific detailed levels, of course, of statistics and emissions and this and that. However, I have to say that the statistics and the data inform all the other SDGs as well. And because the annual progress report is actually submitted through basically our statistics division and therefore is informed by national statistical data, a lot of the work that you're doing at the national level comes through in a very aggregated format to the political forum under sustainable development. So I think that's important to just keep in mind that there's yet another forum where all this information that you gather is actually used very actively at the global level. We had the last progress report last summer in 2018, and basically the type of information that's captured there is just a number of countries that have ratified the agreement, which at that point, of course, which is before July even, was 175, and 168 first-generation NDCs had been reported and adopted. But again, I know these figures, of course, have changed, and I'm sure Vlad can give us the figures of this morning, even if needed. I spoke about the voluntary national reviews first. They're very interesting. They're basically presented normally by the ministers that are here at the high-level political forum, or even if there are heads of state or government in town. They will present the end result, but there are also written reports available, or different types of, what should I say, reports, because it doesn't actually have to be a written report. It can be slides, it can be a video, it can be all kinds of formats that are submitted, and we, of course, make available on our website. So you will be able to see all of the national contributions to the discussion of the HLPF through the voluntary national reviews on our website, as well as we prepare a synthesis report every year that sort of cuts across the reviews that were held that particular year. Again, it's very aggregated information, but the types of sort of conclusions that you can draw very easily is, of course, that there are many countries that are on track to achieve emission reduction targets, that there are policies, that there are numerous forms of coordination mechanisms. But again, to get back to what Vlad was saying, that this issue of coordination among institutions is not a new issue, of course. It's been there as long as Rina and I can remember, from 20 years ago, and after the first adoption, if you will, of the Agenda 21. Nonetheless, it's an essential element, and it continues to be an essential element. But I think we shouldn't forget that it's a vehicle, it's a tool to achieve integration of information, and it doesn't stop by having a coordinating mechanism that involves the statistical office with the environment ministry or the planning ministry or whatever. It's not until this coordinating mechanism actually starts producing joint plans or tackle challenges jointly or through this mechanism that you will really see integration in practice. And I think that's where we at least observe still great challenges, and much needs to be done, not only in relation to climate, but in general in relation to the Sustainable Development Goals. Another thing that, of course, also comes up in the reports is this importance of research and innovation, scenario and modeling work at the national level. And then one thing that we notice, which is that there's little information in the reports on how climate and other SDGs are tackled in complementary approaches. And I think it comes back a little bit to this issue of the national level and how it's actually addressed. So there is an awareness from the countries that report. The question is, how is it tackled? And we at least do not yet see a lot of that information appearing at the HLPF level. So I wanted to just briefly highlight that there is a lot of very interesting work going on the complementarity and the synergies between the Sustainable Development Agenda and the Paris Agreement. One of the analyses that we use in our own work is from a German research institute that has basically analyzed at the target level the overlap between NDC policies and reports and what it refers to in the SDG targets. And you'll see a very high overlap in many areas. Of course, the most obvious with energy and water and agriculture and so forth, but they're not the only ones. This is actually a dynamic interface where you can go into more details with the different areas. But another important body of work that we benefit from is from the World Resource Institute, and I know we have David O'Connor here who's partly wears that hat, so he's also a good source of information on what is done actually to analyze these synergies and how you can enhance implementation at the national level through looking at the synergies and entry points that address both climate and SDG targets. Now, as Vlad also mentioned, the last COP, it was very clear from the IPCC report that we are in crisis mode. I think, in a sense, in this forum, we're probably speaking to the converted already. But there was some heat and discussion around this issue of the difference between reaching or aiming for the 2-degree vis-a-vis the 1.5-degree goal. And there is this language, of course, in the Paris Agreement about the commitment is for 2, but we're aiming for the 1.5 degree. And it's quite dramatic to analyze the difference in impacts, of course, and that's what IPCC put forward very convincingly at the forum. So in that context, and through his commitment to addressing climate and SDGs, the Secretary General will host a climate summit this fall. And what's interesting, one of the things that's interesting at least, is that it's held in 1 week where we have the heads of state and government traditionally in New York for our what we call high-level week. It is held back-to-back with the first summit-level meeting of the high-level political forum. So the first overall review of the Sustainable Development Agenda. It is held in the same week as a mandated high-level dialogue on financing for development. It is also held in the same week as there is a review of progress on the concerns of 6 countries in the context of sustainable development. So this is really a week that we will, or that we consider, is a very important opportunity for countries to share what is going on, but also to speak to solutions and challenges and what are we doing about it, because as we hear consistently, we don't actually have time to wait, right? I mean, we have a window of 12, 15 years or so to actually take action if we're even going to try to reach the 1.5 degree target as per the IPCC report. So the SG is very concerned at this, and he has also, of course, recognized and is looking to the fact that the current level of NDCs do not amount to what is needed in terms of action to actually fulfill the commitments and the goals of the Paris Agreement and the climate agenda as such. And therefore, he wants to have this meeting at the head of state level to discuss solutions and sort of generate momentum and drive ambition. It's going to be very much focused on partnerships on solution-based experience sharing. Of course, this is not a negotiating body, but it's nonetheless a very opportune time for heads of state to put their heads together and speak to solutions. He has decided to focus on different tracks, if you will, on energy transition, on finance and carbon pricing, industry transition, nature-based solutions, cities and local action, and resilience and adaptation. And there's a whole process around it, if you're interested, that speaks to different countries taking leadership in sort of driving coalitions towards action in these different areas. They're supported by the UN system broadly, of course, at the technical level. But altogether, I think it's important to look at this year, 2019, in a continuum and what's actually happening here at the global level to raise awareness of the climate challenge and the sustainable development challenge. We have a mandated GA high-level meeting on climate, which takes place on the 28th of March here in New York. It's actually on the basis of a resolution, again, by member states that wanted to have a bridge, if you will, between COP24 in Poland and towards the HLPF review and the summit on climate action of the SG in September. There will be, in the terms of the SG's sort of timeline, there's a pre-summit or a set meeting in Abu Dhabi at the end of June. And then, of course, there's a summit itself in September. But before that, we will have, of course, a high-level political forum in July, which will thematically look at SDG 13, the climate goal. And then of the informal ways that the UN system tries to support all of this work, of course, by member states. What we're doing together with UNFCCC is, in fact, we are convening a conference on climate and SDG synergies, which will be held the first days of April in Copenhagen, at the UN city in Copenhagen. And it is primarily, of course, for member states as well to engage in an informal manner. But also, of course, there will be think tanks and stakeholders, and the UN system will be there as well. But it is an aim not only to contribute to HLPF discussions, but also to provide information to the climate summit itself. I'm going to jump over that and just say, in light of time, thank you for your attention. And hope to see you in the HLPF.
Thank you so much, Brigitte, for a fantastic overview of all the different political processes and for linking them really nicely back to the work of the SDG, the IAG, the Statistical Commission, and UNFCCC processes, the Paris Agreement in particular, and Transparency Framework, etc. Yeah, there may be some of the countries present here who will be presenting their VNRs this year, so they could try now to make the link, internally, and try to make sure that some aspect of statistics is, more clearly brought into the picture. So we encourage you all who may be participating, or your countries participating. Finally, I'll pass the floor now to Dr. Albina Chua, Director General, National Bureau of Statistics of the United Republic of Tanzania, to present their work and plans in the area of climate change statistics. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Madam Rina, and thank you so much, delegates. After listening to all these elephant institutions that dealing with the climate change, then I'll be sharing with you the Tanzanian experience in the compilation of climate change statistics. I'll be talking about the background information, what are the national efforts to combat the climate change in Tanzania right now, and the implication for climate change, data availability, and then I will conclude. Just for the background, let me just remind you, climate change is one of the most important issues on the global political and economic agenda, as just like previous speakers has just said. But again, yet there is no reliable data to measure and monitor its impact on the society. Madam Rina, she has shown to us. The adverse impact of climate change are affecting all countries, and especially developing countries, and even more serious in sub-Saharan Africa, as we can see on the pictures there. It really affects, and we are witnessing persistent drought, floods and extreme weather events, rising sea levels, coastal erosion and ocean acidification, further threatening food security, water, energy, and health. Really, what is the situation in Tanzania right now? Currently, more than 70% of all natural disasters in Tanzania are climate change related and are linked to recurrent droughts and floods. Vulnerability in agriculture, we are also witnessing that one. And for us in Tanzania, agriculture really play a big role. It provides 100% of the food we do consume, and it does employ more than 60% of our labor force. We are currently now seeing change in weather patterns in Tanzania, rainfall intensity and drought in some part of Tanzania. We are currently also seeing shift in agricultural production, reduce the productivity and damaging our crops and livestock in Tanzania. What really the national efforts that we are doing currently to combat climate change in Tanzania? First, we are revising our national environment policy that we do have back to 1997 to accommodate new emerging issues such as climate change, just like we have seen. We are also doing the ratification and implementation of various multilateral environmental agreements, and also establishment of national climate change strategy. Currently, we have this 2012 to address both adaptation and mitigations in line with the country's vision for sustainable development. This is really the national effort that is going on in Tanzania right now. And of course, the alignment of the SDG climate goal number 13 with national development programs. In Tanzania, we do have what we call a 5-year development plan 2 now we're implementing, and also establishment of a national technical working group on environmental statistics that we normally coordinate at the National Bureau of Statistics, and the coordination issues. So in line with establishing this technical working group, I hope we will reach where we want to be. And also participation in testing the United Nations Statistical Division questionnaire on climate change, on the area of applicability, data availability, and the possible alternative and additional indicators which are used by the country. Climate change, how do we know? We are seeing global temperature rise. We are seeing warming oceans, shrinking ice sheets, glacial retreat. For instance, Mountain Kilimanjaro, the longest mountain in Africa, the snow at the Cape has started melting. We are seeing extreme events. We are seeing sea level rise. What shall we do? Of course, we need scientific statistical methods to facilitate evidence-based decision on climate change system, which include, as Madam Rina has pointed out, identification of climate change drivers, formulate mitigation and adaptation measures, assess the impact of climate change, and minimize vulnerability to the impact of climate change vulnerability aspects. And of course, climate change statistics, as we know, are fundamental to improve the evidence-based climate policy makings and to enable a well-designed response to the changes in climate that we are increasingly experiencing, as we have seen. Of course, now we need statistical tools, advancement in technology. Statistician and the new statistical techniques are also required that will be used to different sources of the data to improve understanding of the magnitude of the problems currently the global is currently facing on the climate change. Statistical analytical tools, and so on and so forth. Let me talk about the current data available in Tanzania. Thank you so much, Madam Rina. With the technical support from UNSD, my office managed to produce the first comprehensive National Environmental Statistics Report back in 2017, which really aligned to the framework for development of environmental statistics that we endorsed in 2013. And under this strategy, of course, some climate change statistics are also contributed to evidence-based planning for climate change program in Tanzania. And as my previous speakers pointed out, currently we are working with a German organization to compile a comprehensive report on climate change statistics. We do also have the temperature data. And now we are witnessing the changes in the minimum, in the monthly mean maximum temperature. If you look at these two line graphs, and if you look at the blue one, that runs from 1980s to 2010, we are seeing the temperature maximum minimum of 29.4 Celsius degrees. And then from 2012 to 2016, we are seeing the rising of the temperature, 30. So to cope with less than 2 centigrade, really we need to mitigate risks of this climate change. So in a nutshell, the mean maximum temperature for Tanzania currently is 28.5 degrees centigrade. We also have data on rainfall, and in Tanzania we normally received 2 rains. One is from March to May, and short one October to December. And for the period of 2012 to 2016, we have been receiving a minimum of 893.9 millimeter recorded from different meteorological stations in Tanzania. We also have emission to air. That means consumption of ozone depleting substance. Of course, as we know, Tanzania is a low volume consuming country of the ODS, and the market of ODS alternatives in Tanzania is dominated by imported, which amounted to 723.08 metric tons in 2015 compared to 290.78 metric tons in 2012. What I'm trying to see is this metric tons is increasing. And the main sector that use ODS alternatives in Tanzania are aerosols, which contribute to 70.5%, refrigeration servicing and air conditioning services comprise of 29.5% in Tanzania. Now, looking at the emission to air, consumption of ODS, the pattern is not encouraging. If you look at the 2012, it's just like 232.6 metric tons. By 2015, 636.4 metric tons, almost like doubled. Now, by 2030, we are going to experience in triple, 1,435.10. So mitigation factor really needs to take place here. This calls upon the policy policymakers to do something there. But again, they need evidence data to inform the real situation under the ground. Now, what really are we doing? As I said in the previous slide, we are working very closely with this German organization to provide support to come up with a comprehensive climate change statistics. And of course, we'll be using this IPCC And the IPCC is the Intergovernmental Panel for Climate Change Framework that is embedded in the framework of environmental statistics that will be used to identify the existing data gaps, data collection and the report writing, and definitely utilization, dissemination and utilization of this report. And again, the National Bureau of Statistics is also planning to consider the updated framework on climate risk of the 5th IPCC. Of course, as I said before, this German organization will also help us to hire a consultant that will work with us. And of course, we will establish a climate change statistics committee, because this is about the partnership and the coordination to ensure we tap all the data available that will inform the decision making. And to conclude, the National Bureau of Statistics, as part of the United Nations Statistical Division Expert Group on Environmental Statistics, really we do appreciate the work of this group in contributing to the global set of climate change statistics and indicators that UNSD was requested by the 47th session of the Statistical Commission to develop. And the Tanzania National Bureau of Statistics is also looking forward to translate some of the outcomes of the COP24 in Katowice into expected reporting requirements. Of course, we have to align with the global agreement. And of course, my take today is it doesn't cost more to deal with climate change. It costs more to ignore it. So let us, all of us, play our role. Thanks so much, and thanks so much, my colleagues.
Thank you very much, Dr. Chua, for an excellent presentation and giving us all the perspective from a national level with regard to the situation on climate change, the data availability, the challenges you face, but also the very positive steps that you are taking to develop this area further and align it also with the global processes that are currently ongoing. And as your role as co-chair of the Interagency Expert Group, of course, this is very much at your heart when you deal with this group and have to address, the issue also in Goal 13. But as we know, climate change impacts a lot of the different goals. So we have a few more minutes, maybe 5 to 10 minutes, sorry. So if you have any quick questions, comments, I'll start, I think, with David O'Connor, please, yeah, and then Michael Nagy, yeah, David.
Much, Rina, and thanks to all the presenters for very excellent presentations. I have just 2 questions quickly, one more for Vlad, I guess. Did I get your name right? And maybe Rina as well. And then one maybe more for Birgit. And I don't have one for you, Madam, from Tanzania at the moment, but I'll think of one. You talked about some of the indicators on mitigation, for example, renewable energy share of consumption, et cetera. But I was wondering whether any thought has been given by Stats Division or by UNFCCC to sort of combined indicators or indicators that would allow one to measure access to renewables or uptake of renewables by different income groups or different, social groups that might be considered, vulnerable or at risk of being left behind, so to speak. So similarly with, low carbon public transport or whatever it might be, given that, there are cost implications and they may not be affordable to all people. So are there any efforts to measure that? For Birgit, the question is, and maybe others may want to chime in on this as well, colleagues at WRI have been thinking about, how to provide a little bit more than a soft wiring between all of the events leading up to the Climate Action Summit and the SDG related work, and looking at how these agendas come together. And of course, Copenhagen will do that. But in terms of the summit period itself, that week of September, some have remarked that the morning of the 24th of September seems to be kind of a vacant morning where I think there'll be, you know, heads of state speaking and so on, but there won't be any summit or high-level event happening, and whether there may be an opportunity there for thinking about doing something around the linkages, the integration, connections between these two agendas. So I'll leave it there.
Yeah, maybe.
You want to respond?
I can.
Yeah,
Oh.
I think because it's the list of stuff.
Yeah. So maybe I'll quickly respond to David, and then we'll come to Michael's questions. So yeah, with the indicators, yeah, absolutely, we will be doing such things. The ones we presented now are just a sort of surfacing of what is being compiled at national level, but as I hinted at, or I think explicitly said, sometimes it's difficult to determine exactly which main indicator to use, and of course we will aggregate, disaggregate as appropriate. So those kind of things will come into play. I think that's all I need to say. I'll pass it to maybe Brigitte to respond to David, and then we'll take the next question. Thank you.
Thank you, David, for the question. I mean, I think you're absolutely right. It's a very crucial week, and it's also a very crucial year to speak to the linkages between the two agendas, because one can basically facilitate implementation of the other. You're right, the morning of the 24th is not booked by other events, but I think that's quite deliberate, if you will, because in fact you have statements by heads of states and government, and they are not particularly necessarily fond of having all of these other events at the same time, though they have agreed to all the other events at the same time. But that's one of the curiosities that we work with every year. Nonetheless, I do think that anything that can be done to reach this very high-level group of people that are in town and by recognized institutions is very important. So, I mean, we would certainly be supportive of that kind of initiative, but, you know, we have no particular what should I say, authority to say that it should be here or there or whatever. But it's definitely a good idea. There is also a Climate Action Week, of course, right before in New York. So I'm hoping that there will be plenty of opportunities to sort of use some of the expertise that's in town in any event. Yeah.
Thank you. Michael from ECE.
I will be very brief. Can you hear me? Okay. Yeah, thank you for the presentations and also the update on all these international events that are so important for the policy process. And as all of you mentioned, the statistical systems play an important role, but we're all facing resource constraints. In particular, when it comes to some kind of new areas, emerging areas like climate change or environment statistics, even if they are kind of existential for well-being and survival. So my question is, what can be done to raise awareness at the political process to show the importance of strong statistical systems to support climate change-related policy making? The role of NSOs is hardly mentioned in the process of the COP negotiations, and my question is, will it be somehow play a role in this Climate Change Action Summit? Another question, which is maybe a little bit more trickier, is as Vlad mentioned, the policy process is hard to follow, and thank you very much for trying to explain it. So it's even difficult for us to understand that we're not involved on a daily basis in the process, but it's even more difficult to ordinary citizens to understand what's going on there. So very often this results in disbelief with many citizens that this is successful and efficient. Populist parties around the world are using this, and some countries are even considering to withdraw from the Paris Agreement. So is there anything that NSOs can do to measure the progress of this policy process?
Okay, I'll pass it to Vlad, please. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Michael, for the questions. Indeed, it is part of the NSOs were already part of the process, and this is we see this in the developed countries. And this is already happening, as I said, in the developed countries for 15 years, even more now, where parties are submitting inventories, they are using the statistical data, there is a big cooperation. Like last time we were here, we heard from Finland, where the statistical office is in charge of reporting climate change data. So it was already visible. And indeed, there are resource constraints. I think there are resource constraints also for the authorities that are reporting climate change information to UNFCCC. So we see this more and more. I think the important thing here is the domestic cooperation, and this is something that we keep saying. And it was again visible in the negotiation, maybe not shown in the decisions, as you're saying, or in the documents, but there is an implicit cooperation at the domestic level, because the information comes from the energy balances, the information comes from the agriculture statistics that are used for estimating emissions, because again, in agriculture is a bit more difficult than in energy to measure anything. So this thing is well aware in most of the developed countries. Now, this process should also start at the level of developing countries. And again, this is part of the decision that we have received last year from the Statistical Commission to increase this awareness and the cooperation at the domestic level, to support that by the cooperation between UNSD and UNFCCC. So there will be process in the coming 5-6 years until the developing countries will need to report. Indeed, the political the policy process, it is from time to time it's hard to follow. I agree with that, because there are so many things that are discussed. As I explained earlier, we discussed from energy, land use, bunker fuels, I don't know, international transports and so on, to the latest things on RED+ and so on. So there are a lot of things ongoing, and there are multiple processes of negotiations going on in the same time. Again, as I mentioned, only the Paris Agreement work program, which is the guidelines, they have around 200 pages of decision text that needs to be implemented. Only to read that and to make sure that you understand all is there, it takes time, and it takes time for the parties. So I think this will come in the future. As I have mentioned from the beginning, I think the NSOs will play a bigger role in the coming future, and there should be more work done on the cooperation between at the domestical level. Thank you. Rina, if you want to.
Thank you, Vlad. I think I'd like to give Dr. Albina Chua an opportunity to respond from the national level. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks so much. In fact, it's true. My presentation, I said pretty well that we are struggling to get the finance for this. And we do have national strategy for development of statistics in developing countries, where we normally mobilize resources and normally mainstreaming the climate statistics out of that. And the other issue that we normally do is to foster the partnership and the coordination within the national statistical offices, the national statistical system. That really has proved to be of much importance to the national statistical offices. Otherwise, we are really struggling to ensure we have the finance to do that. Of course, in coming 5 years, as he has pointed out, probably we will be there.
Brigitte, please.
Yeah, just very briefly, in terms of this awareness point and the link between the statistical information and the policy dynamics, in fact, I think it's well recognized in the context of the HLPF. There is a specific session that speaks to the science policy interface, for instance, right? The fact that only one of 2 mandated reports to the HLPF is in fact based on statistical information speaks to the important and the recognition that's actually taking place of the contribution of national statistical offices and reporting mechanisms to these global bodies. nonetheless, it's a challenge that have always been there, and even in previous incarnations of intergovernmental fora for sustainable development, this was always an issue. This link between policy and statistical evidence, and I think all we can do, at least at this level in New York, is to sort of provide opportunities for that interface to happen in the meetings, but also around the meetings. I mean, we have more than, I think, 240 side events, for instance, at the HLPF. We have many delegates that come merely for them because they're actually the place where you engage with people that are doers of different types of activities. So there are many opportunities, but I agree it's a continuous struggle that we'll have to deal with, of course.
Thank you, Brigitte. I know Ryan had asked for the floor. If we can have a maybe quick question, then we need to probably close soon. Thank you.
Thank you. Actually, it's a comment. I understand the COP25 is going to be held, hosted by the government in Chile, in Santiago, perhaps, where our headquarters are from ECLAC are. So, of course, we're going to be there. In ECLAC, we have a very strong program, both from the policy side on climate change economics and on the statistical side that we are building upon climate change and disaster-related statistics. So if we could do anything to raise awareness, have a side event, I have no idea how this works. Just like Michael was saying, that on behalf of the statistical community, we could raise awareness as to the importance of financing and supporting the development of climate change and environment and economic statistics and social statistics as well, because climate change is multi-domain. We're offering our services as experts in this field in order to be able to do something in Santiago on behalf of all of us, of course, who are very concerned and working for a long time on this. So that's just one offering, and thank you so much for this side event. It's fantastic that we're doing this in the StatCom. Thank you.
Thank you, Ryan. I think we probably need to close now. I see our chair has come, unless you have a question. Anyway, we are still all around if there's any more bilateral discussion can continue, of course. And thank you to all our guest speakers for coming, and to our delegates who attended this morning's side event. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.